So, hi, welcome. We are chatting today about this hypothetical. What if we told parents, if you don't think this assignment is appropriate for your child, you can excuse it? So, we're going to brainstorm some ideas around what kind of that might mean and whether or not that would even be appropriate or reasonable. So, I'm Alice Keeler. I was a high school math teacher, and now I teach teachers at Fresno State University in the credential program. And I have 5 kids. They are, and we just had birthdays, so 12, 11, 9, 6, and almost 4.
All right. My name's Jody Rice. I teach AP English and online social sciences at a school in Toronto, Canada. I teach the high school level, obviously AP, and I have one child. She's 5.5, and she'll be entering grade 1 in September.
Right.
Hi, and I'm Lee Wozniak, and I am a middle school library media specialist. I have 1,500 students in 7th and 8th grade. Yeah, big school. And so I teach basically information literacy lessons, digital citizenship skills, that kind of thing. And I have 2 daughters in their 20s. I'm old. I have 2 daughters in their 20s, and they're all grown up, and that's it.
Right. Awesome. So, I have 5 kids, and a lot of times what I just see coming home sometimes is not appropriate for what my kid is doing. So, for example, when my daughter was in 1st grade, she knew how to multiply when she was in kindergarten. I'm a math teacher. So her 1st grade teacher was sending home packets of 0 plus 1 worksheets. And, it's just me fighting with my kids to do it. And then I had another incident where my son comes home and says, hey, Mom, can you help me with he was in 3rd grade, can you help me with the commutative and the associative property? I'm like, well, I'm a math teacher, so I can, but I really don't want to. That's not how I want to spend my evening personally. But my son's now fighting with me about it, because he wants to hear it from their mom. And again, so that's not how I want to spend my nights, but just like, is this really necessary, and what would be better for him maybe would have been something else. So that's kind of where I started from is, how can we do this better than just expecting that parents are going to accept whatever comes home when they might have some more knowledge about their kid that they could include in the mix. So Jody, do you want to kind of throw in some ideas?
Yeah, so what caught my attention was the word appropriate, because that can have, and I think someone else also noticed that and commented similarly that, there are so many definitions and so many takes on what people think of when they think of the word appropriate. In my situation, it's less about is this at an appropriate level for my student or for my child, and it often is because I'm teaching English. Very often, the word appropriate is associated with content, and whether content is something that butts up against perhaps the values of the family, or that they feel is not. Well, I guess in that case it does come to age. Is not something that they want their child exposed to at that age. And I'm lucky in that I teach in a really liberal environment, in the sense of the parents are very open to new experiences for their kids, and they're interested in having them be exposed to lots of different perspectives and lots of different cultures or worldviews or arguments or positions, and so very rarely do I come up against that. But in my work in the AP community, I certainly hear tons of stories of teachers who are trying to bring challenging texts into the classroom, who parents will then say, well, this is not appropriate and my child will not read it, in many cases, without really having had that conversation with the parent, or with the teacher rather, about their motives for introducing the book, how it's going to be addressed in the classroom, why it's appropriate for discussion in an AP environment, how the AP is trying to give them a sort of a college level experience of reading. And so I think that was where I was coming from in reacting to the word appropriate. And on the flip side, as a parent of a young child who's going to be entering into the school system, I totally understand the resistance to busy work and the resistance to homework for homework's sake, and the idea of homework as practice, which, especially for a child who doesn't need that practice, seems pointless. My child is a strong reader at kindergarten level, and so when I have a parent interview with a teacher who says she needs to practice her reading, I chuckle inside and say, well, I mean, okay, she's practicing her reading and that she's reading, but that's not homework. And I don't really see it as homework. And if she's going to be assigned that kind of homework just because it's considered practice, then I don't see it. So I come at it from those two opposing perspectives.
Lee, you want to weigh in?
I don't know what to respond to first. Like Jody, being in the library, my hackles get raised with that word appropriate, because of course, we've, heard many stories of challenges, and, we did have one challenge in our district, and thankfully our board really handled it well. And in our district, they're pretty good about offering, if ever a parent does object to something, we always have an alternative that the child can do, because you're not going to change those minds. And, maybe you shouldn't. Although as a librarian, we kind of are taught that you should. Those are probably the very kids who need those texts. But I think Jody hit on it, that it's all about communication ahead of time. And I think for both parents and teachers, it's really about communication ahead of time. If the parents have communicated to the teacher where their child is, what their child, what they see that their child needs or what their child can do, and then if the teacher also, number one, it's about good lesson and assignment planning. And number two, it's about good communication about what the goals are, what the educational goals are, and why you're doing it this way, and what your expectations are. And it's about partnering as much as possible, almost as if every child had an IEP, the whole buzzword these days about personalized learning. And I think if there's good communication between the parents and the teachers, that it can work. And I don't think you necessarily, want to throw out a blanket statement, well, if you don't think it's appropriate for your child, they don't have to do it, because that, of course, is a little bit too simplified. But it's definitely something that there should always be communication between parents and teachers. If you really do think that something is not useful for your child or doesn't reach the educational goals for your child, that's something that you need to express as a parent. But as an educator, you also need to, hopefully you know what you're doing. And the parents aren't just questioning that, or just because there is such a negativity in education these days, both an anti-teacher sentiment and negativity among teachers of trying anything new or taking risks. So there's a lot to talk about here.
Sure, and those are all really good points. So for me, when I said appropriate, I just meant at an appropriate level, not necessarily the materials appropriate. So I think that just takes the conversation in a really interesting direction. I think, Lee, you hit on it. It's just so tricky. Like, should we be telling parents what to think just because legally obligated their kid is in your class? Do they have to think in a certain way? when we have freedom of speech, and even if we don't like it. So that's, I mean, a lot of times I wouldn't agree and I wouldn't like it that a parent doesn't like what we're saying, but I don't know if they have that right or not. So my thought was more along the lines of, is this something that I think is developmentally appropriate, interesting, along their interest lines? You know, so for an example, I love my son's teacher. I think she's fabulous. And I met with her, and she was talking about my son's paper that he wrote, and she's like, it's okay. And the reason I think is because he just didn't care about the topic. So she was really excited. She would put this whole thing together on the zoo, which is really cool. And I know a lot of kids are really into it, but my kid just doesn't like the zoo. He's not into it. It's not his thing. And if she had said, well, I approached him and I said, hey, son, can you write your paper on a Minecraft zoo? Like, can you go into Minecraft and build a zoo and then make some arguments why a Minecraft zoo is better than a regular zoo? Like, he got so excited. My son's super introverted. I'm like, can you present this to your class? He's like, yeah, I can. You know, so it's just sometimes, I mean, let's just be honest, it's impossible for the teacher to know your kid at the level that you know them. And so it's like, you know, I looked at that and I'm like, that's not a bad assignment. Like, and she was really trying hard, and she connected with a lot of kids. Just didn't connect with my kid. He was like, zoo. And so it's like, and I can just throw in there, and she's great because she totally takes that suggestion. But, you know, and I can suggest, like, you know, Mike, can you do it about Minecraft? So some teachers would be on it and some teachers not. So I love that I know that when with my son's teacher, I can say, you know, I really feel like this isn't within his interest level. We're going to kind of modify it a little bit. She says yes. But I've had other teachers that are like, yeah. So it's, you know, and it shuts me down, right? Because how do I partner with that teacher when they're just...
See, I think what you're talking about there, though, Alice, is very different from your initial suggestion, which was to excuse the student, right? Because what you're talking about isn't excusing your son. He still had to show his skills, and he still had to connect to what they were doing in the classroom. So what you suggested was a modification or sort of a different approach that allowed you to help the teacher make a connection for your son with the assignment. And I think what might otherwise be interpreted is, well, you know, he doesn't like this assignment. Why should he have to do it? And I think that's what probably most teachers feel when the parent challenges what they've done in the classroom, just because of the prevailing climate now of challenging the professional judgment of teachers. And the other thing too is that very often I find that the student who's in my classroom is often a very different kid from the student who's at home. And with their peers around them, and with challenges that their parents would never have dreamed that they could rise to. You know, like I will tell a parent that their kid did something in the classroom, and the parent will just look at me in shock, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But mostly, you know, like the gratifying ones are the ones where you're like, and your kid said this thing, and it was, you know, a really great, and then they stood up, and the parent says, my kid stood up in front of the class and gave a presentation on Minecraft, and he was so into it, but he's so introverted. And so, you know, you often encounter this disjunction between the kid that the teacher is working with and the kid that the parent is working with, and sometimes that's not a bad thing either, because kids will sort of intuitively know how to adapt to different situations and what face they're going to need to use in order to function really well in a situation that maybe is stressful to them, but they need to manage it, as opposed to being at home where they're more comfortable and they don't need to figure out how to deal with those stresses. And what I worry about is a parent who puts the kibosh on something that they feel is not appropriate because it's too difficult or whatever it is, but the teacher knows from having observed that kid in the class that the kid has that potential, and the parent needs to let the kid rise to the occasion. And I've seen that happen, you know, where the parent will shelter the kid, saying, oh, no, no, this is not something that my kid can do. And lo and behold, you put the kid in the situation, and the kid surprises themselves, surprises the parent, maybe even surprises the teacher who sort of had an inkling but wasn't really sure it was going to work out. And so that's another, to me, that's another danger of having the parents have the ability to say they shouldn't do this thing.
Leah, what do you think?
Oh yeah, I think that's why it's got to be a conversation. There's always got to be a three-way conversation, right? Because especially, I mean, I'm at the middle school and Jody, you're at the high school. And I mean, it's true even at the youngest levels as well. It's a three-way conversation between a parent, a teacher, and a child. And that it's always got to stay open, and there's got to be give and take on all three sides. And, you know, that they all need to kind of be involved. You know, that's why, like this, when we initially started this Twitter convo, I had mentioned that this year I did a passion projects with five different classes. And it was very, very different, and it went differently with all of them. And modeled on the IB model for passion projects. And it was really, really interesting because, of course, the kids were supposed to pick something, the topic themselves, something they were passionate about. And it was all, I mean, I did some information literacy skills lessons sort of embedded into, and it was a long-term thing. And, you know, they did these skills, and then they had to incorporate those skills, and then they, you know, it sort of built on itself. But they really needed to do most of the work themselves, and they really floundered. And 3 out of the 5 are sort of what we call E group, which is advanced, the advanced classes, and 2 of them were the lower level classes. And they actually did floundered less than the advanced group kids, because the advanced group kids wanted more structure, a stronger like rubric. They're extremely grade oriented. They wanted, what do I have to do to get an A? What is the due date? What is the this? And we sort of asked them to go on this journey with us, and we asked them to do, because I partnered with the classroom teachers, and they really had a hard time having that much autonomy. And so what I'm interested in is giving the kids more autonomy. But I definitely want, so if we do it again, if the teachers are willing to do it again next year, we'll see. I also want to get that parent buy-in, because that's not an element that we included this year, and I think we would have benefited from that. Because I think most of the parents had no clue what was going on. We did ask the students to go home and talk to their parents about ideas and what's passionate and what matters to them, and I think some of the kids incorporated their parents' input and some didn't. So I would definitely add that element next year, because I think it would help to get buy-in from the parents.
So
I'm not sure how to do that. So
I have maybe a gentle pushback possibly on that. It's like, I know that I would love it if my kids would code. Like, I really, really want my kids' passion to be coding. I've tried paying my kids money. I told my daughter that I'd give her $100 if she learned JavaScript. You know, and so if she comes home saying I get to do a passion project, like, I'm gonna be like, you know, and it's like, yeah, totally. I would never say don't include the parents, but at the same time, like, how much might it stop being the kid's passion?
Absolutely, and that's what I'm afraid of. How can I do it without having the parents take it over, especially for those advanced? And because it's those parents that are the ones pushing for those grades and pushing for, you know, whatever, and, you know, parents saying, well, this will be easier for you to do, or this will be, you know, I know a lot about this, do this and I can help you. And that's not what it's supposed to be. So, you know, at the middle and the high school level, you sort of, I think it's at the middle school level where you really start asking for less input from parents.
Have more parents.
That's true. 1,500, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite sure how to do that. So I'm open to suggestions.
And the flip side too is, and the flip side of that too is with the risk averse. You know, like you're talking, Lee, about your upper level kids who are risk averse. Their parents are even more
Yes.
averse because of how invested they are in their children's success. You know, those high achieving kids,
Yep.
and they're not going to let anything get in the way of their kids' success.
Yep.
And so very often that translates into either, you know, I'll do it for you, or here's an easier way to do it, and I'm going to remove the obstacles.
Right.
You know, I have a friend who can give you all that information, or whatever it is. Or in the scenario of, you know, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate. You're not going to get an A on that. It's not appropriate. And then we run into that whole issue of, again, is the parent making a judicious assessment of the kid's ability and allowing risk into the process, or are they balking at risk and teaching their kids to balk at risk by doing that, and not letting the kid try and fail, right? Maybe the assignment is too hard. Maybe the assignment is poorly structured. And that's a lesson for the teacher as much as anything else. But like, I wouldn't know as a teacher if an assignment was too challenging for a kid or whatever, unless the students tried it and failed. And I've had that happen. I've had an assignment that was poorly designed, and the students tried and tried and tried, and they weren't getting anywhere. Yeah. And bless them, they tried. They really wanted to do it, and they really wanted it to work out. And they got so confused and so bogged down, and you know, they weren't my highest achieving kids, and so that was maybe part of the process, that it was both of us, you know, both they and I went through that process of learning. But if the students didn't try, and if the students didn't take on the challenge and fail, then I wouldn't know as a teacher that it was a bad assignment.
So from the parent end, so I hear what you say on that, but then there's that middle gap of where they're working on it that you can't see them struggling and failing. But at me as a parent, I can. So I see my kid at the kitchen table bawling. Just like, and then I look at the directions and I'm like, I'm not really sure what this says either. You know, at that moment, is it okay to be like, we're shutting this down, gotta talk to the teacher? And so I think that's more my statement is, you know what, you're not going to get detention tomorrow. And so I know my own kids, because I've looked at that and I'm like, no, this doesn't make sense. This is, you know, we're not doing this. And their fear, my child's fear is, well, I'm gonna lose my recess. I'm gonna they have some card system. And so opening that communication to say, you know what, when you do observe that they're struggling through it in ways that you think, you know, they really shouldn't be struggling like that, there's something's missing. I personally find it's impossible to write clear directions for everybody. Like, so many times, it's clear in my mind, like, what don't you get? And, you know, when the kids are in front of me, I can't even think of hardly even one time where I've given directions that somebody's not like, what, Keeler? And, you know, but they're in front of me, so, you know, I make those corrections. But when they go home, I can always see that in that moment. And obviously, I don't want my kids to overly stress and spend significant amounts of times, especially when human nature, I'm just not going to always be clear. And so how do we encourage parents to say that it's okay to communicate that? So a lot of times when I'm talking to parents and I see people on my parent friends on Facebook just upset that their kid's crying and whatever, and I'm like, just say no, you know, like, talk to the teacher. And they're just so afraid. I hear so many parents, they're afraid to speak up. And so I guess my statement is how do we help parents to feel like it's okay to speak up and to make those conversations, and why is there a culture that we feel like your kid's going to be punished if the parent says something? Leah?
That's a really good question. I mean, I've been there. I've been that parent. You know, my older daughter had a lot of trouble. She had a reading disability when she was younger, and I remember she had a teacher in 4th grade that gave, I mean, this kid, she would come home and start homework at 3 o'clock when she got home, and at 11 o'clock at night, she'd still be doing it. And she was the kind of kid that would never not do something, even if I told her it was okay not to do it, you know. And there was this whole climate survey where the district sent out that said, how many minutes, is your child doing of homework a night? And the grades, this is how many they should be doing. And if they don't finish it, then they should just stop. And it's like, yeah, but if you have a kid with a learning disability, or if you have, it's going to take them longer. And so they're not going to finish. And so then they're not going to get a good grade, and they're not going to get, it just, I don't know. It's a big old mess. And, but I think it just always comes back to, communication. I hate to keep harping at that, but it is, it's hard. How do you let parents know that it's okay to say that, to express that, and how do you know it's not just, we played soccer for 3 hours tonight, and she's too tired, so she's got to go to bed. But that, I have a niece that is on a traveling soccer team, and the kid doesn't even start her homework till 10, 11 o'clock at night. I mean, she's in high school, but it's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't have all the answers, but I know.
I'm pretty sure none of us have the answers. Jody, what do you think?
Well, I mean, there's just so many factors. I mean, take, for starters, homework that counts for points. Because then you don't do the homework, you don't get the points, then suddenly your grade suffers. And then it devalues the homework, because the homework isn't there for a reason other than to get points. And so that's why I try as much as I can, and I'm not always successful with it, but I try as much as I can to design the homework as legitimate preparation for whatever's coming in the next class. And if you didn't do it, then the only real penalty is you're just not prepared that day. And it happens. And your grade's not going to suffer directly from that. And if you need to come see me to catch up something, then you can do that. Or if you can do it another way or whatever. I mean, a lot of my class is discussion based. Mm-hmm. And so it is important for kids to come to the table with something to say.
Sure.
Sometimes they're having an off day and they'll sit and they'll listen and they'll take notes. Okay, if that's happening every single time, then we need to have a conversation about what are they going to do in order to get in on the conversation, even if it's not verbally. Can they do it in some other way? But the homework for points thing is one thing. And then, with kids who are, for example, elite athletes or learning disability, all different reasons why it might take them longer, or they might not have enough hours in the day to do homework. I mean, we have a system that requires that students move with their age group from year to year. So we could, if you were an elite athlete, why do you have to finish high school in 4 years? Maybe you take 5 years and you take fewer courses to allow yourself more time, but that's viewed as a failure because you're not finishing in the same period of time as all of your peers. You're not getting to college at the same time. Whatever you squandered your time.
As you're a year older and you're more,
Yeah, I mean, I'd love a system that was less geared to marching through a certain period of, and we have the same thing at our school. We have kids who are elite athletes, and they're taking a full course load, and I sit there and I wonder, why are you torturing yourself by taking a full course load and spending all this time with elite performance, where you're doing, some of them are spending 3, 4, 5 hours of time a day practicing or rehearsing or whatever. And I always think that the ones who are most successful are the ones who spread it out.
Yeah.
So I don't. I mean, we could go on forever. There's so many systemic things that contribute to the problem. Like, if we could build a perfect system, we'd remove all of those things, and then we'd have answers. I don't know. I think basically I ask my kids. We get feedback from them at least twice a year. I do ask them. I didn't in this year's. I got to go back now, the end of year survey, and ask them about, do you think the course load was reasonable? Do you think you were able to balance? Was it more or less than other courses? That kind of thing. And that's data that I like to have, And over the years, I have reduced the amount of stuff I expect students to do at home, but I still do need them to do certain things at home. I need them to read at home. I need them to have questions, bring questions with them to discussion. Like I need them to do those things. So there are certain things that I do need them to do at home. But as much as possible, I try to make it actual part of preparation for one day to the next, and not just practice or whatever we've done in class already. I don't know. I wish I had answers. I don't have answers.
Well, most of the time when you see me ranting that I put out something, it's in response to a conversation that I'm having with somebody. So without giving away too much information with the conversation I was having, parent was frustrated because the kid was coming home with stacks of worksheets that was taking their primary age child hours to complete, but they were below the student's ability level. Like, it was straight up busy work. And they went in to talk to the teacher and like, look, my kid's crying. They're upset. We're arguing with them. And the teacher says, how dare you question my lesson planning? And just having a heartfelt conversation with this parent who's just frustrated as all heck, because they did talk to the teacher. And, to me, it's really a paradigm shift in some ways for some teachers. When I taught math for 14 years, and when I first started teaching math, and I would have people say things to me like, they should be able to take the test over again. That's crazy. Like I couldn't even fathom that comment. I'm like, that is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. And my learning director one time, he told me, he's like, well, but how would they use this? And I'm like, I don't remember what math algebra lesson that we were doing at the time, but I'm thinking, I don't know, you wouldn't use it. I'm like, we just do these math problems. And, and those things kind of sit in with me, and later on I'm like, okay, right, this is about learning. And so, if I'm focusing on learning, then yeah, I want them to retake it. But I would always, the district gave me, this is the homework, we're supposed to do page 30, 1 through 20 all, and I gave every single kid the same assignment. So I put literally zero thought into what I assigned the kids for years. And I would have parents call me, and they're just like, my kid's struggling, this is da-da-da, and I'm just like, it's the homework. Like, it's just a paradigm shift that it's not so much that I didn't care, it's just that that's what you do. And how do I even break past that? It took me a long time, is to think, how can I differentiate and do some different things for parents, and to listen, hear that my kid's not doing well with this, and it's not appropriate for what they know how to do. They're crying. And so how do I make that adjustment?
I think there are a lot of factors that parents don't realize that teachers are dealing with either. Where something's coming down from on high, this is how you have to do things, and this is how you have to evaluate your students, and this is how you are going to be evaluated. And if you don't have this data, if you don't have these assignments graded in certain way, according to a certain rubric, if you haven't done these assignments, then you have failed. That the teacher's being evaluated on those things as well. And I think because of, what we've all mentioned several times, the whole anti-teacher, anti-education climate these days, I think teachers are on the defensive. So when they hear a parent coming in, they hear it as that they're being questioned, their understanding and knowledge of as an educator is being questioned, and their ability to do lesson planning is being questioned, or harshly judged by, if they feel they're being harshly judged by administration and they're being harshly judged by parents, they're stuck in the middle and they're defensive on both ends. And so then they're not really open to when a parent, has a genuine, not just we all know there are some parents who don't value education, and we all know there are some parents who are going to take advantage of the possibility of not just doing a modification or an alternative, but just trying to excuse their kid. Or, I'm sorry, my kid hasn't done their homework all semester, but what can they do to make it up to get an A now that all the grades are due in 2 days, that kind of thing. Aside from all of that, I think you know, sometimes teachers are stuck between that rock and a hard place, and so that may be why some may not be open to that kind of conversation. But and it's unfortunate, but I think if parents understand that better, then maybe they may approach it differently. But I think there are always going to be some people that are just going to give you a hard time and not going to respond.
Yep.
On both sides.
Sure. Jody?
Yeah, that was, Lee took the words out of my mouth. That, you know, I suspect that in many cases, not all, because, you know, there are always going to be people who are just stuck in their ways. But I feel as though the conversations that I've had with a lot of teachers boil down to, if I don't do it this way, it's my job. I would give $1,000 a day to do it differently, but I can't. And, you know, teachers who are dealing with student loads, you know, at the high school level of up to 160, 180 kids. And how do you individualize? How do you have the time to speak to each? And I'm so lucky. I work in a private school. I have a very small number of students. I'm able to have those conversations with my students. I'm able, if I need to, have those conversations with parents. Parents in my school are willing to come in and able to come in to talk to me. It's not always the case. But, you know, a lot of teachers are, like Lee said, they're really stuck in a situation where they're trying they're in survival mode. And they're trying to do the best they can with the resources they're given, and serve a huge number of very different kids from very different homes and backgrounds, and it becomes lowest common denominator in some cases. And that's one of those big systemic things that is kind of beyond our individual ability to fix. And it would be great if, you know, everybody could be plugged into the same conversations about these things, but they're not. You know, there's 3 of us, and there's
so many
millions of others out there, and if they were all having the same conversation, we wouldn't need to be having this conversation here. But anyway, so yeah, I agree with Lee on that front, and I think that's probably one of the biggest problems that teachers would have adjusting to a different way of doing things.
Yeah, and we're being asked to do so much more with so much less, with fewer resources. Sure. And, you know, and now all of a sudden you have to use, you know, this new system, and all of a sudden you have to use this new whatever. And by the way, you're not going to have access to any technology, but you're supposed to integrate it. And, you know, and we have 3 assemblies this week, and right. We have, you know, 6 weeks of no access to Chromebooks because they're being used across the district for park, and that's another whole concept.
Oh yeah, you know.
We don't have time for that tonight.
I doubt there's any teacher who's sitting there going, yeah, that's a good idea.
God. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenge being an educator these days.
But I'll take, for example, like
parent too, you know, it's
yeah. I'll take, for example, though, I mean, I'm sure you've seen these, Alice, the memes that you see on Facebook of the parent who's trying to help their kid with the math homework, and it's not the way I learned math.
Yep.
And, you know, I look at it and I'm like, well, you know, I wasn't very successful in some of my math in school, but it's probably because I wasn't taught this stuff. And instead I was just taught, like, just do this formula and it'll work out. And I never remembered the formulas, and I was remembering
why?
Right. And so the parents who were able to learn that way turn around and confront the teacher who's trying to teach them the math sense
right.
and the number sense. And because they don't understand what the teacher's trying to do, it wasn't the way it was done when they were kids. You know, I do long division, and long division is done this way. Well, but what does that mean? And what does it actually, you know, mean?
And things to communicate is, you know, even things that people don't like and they almost feel traumatized as a child, that's what they're comfortable with. And it's so hard to do things that are uncomfortable. How do you communicate to parents, we're doing uncomfortable stuff, come on board with us?
And you know, I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how my kid learns math, because it'd be nice to kind of maybe learn some of that stuff over again and do better at it the second time around.
I don't think anybody's given a chance to fail. I
Yeah.
don't think kids are given a chance to fail. Like, that's how you learn.
Have you read the work of Joe Bowler? She's like my new favorite person.
Yeah. I don't think I
BOW.
have.
J-O and then B-O-A-L-E-R. And she has this website, youcubed.org, Y-O-U-C-U-B-E-D. And she's got an 8-minute video on there. And one of the things that she's like, failure is part of the learning process.
Really
So she's
is.
got a lot of really great articles. She has one that's called Fluency Without Fear. And she talks about, and it's a really long article that's full of research. And so, I mean, I just love it. Stanford professor. And it just basically says, being fast at something is not equated with being smart.
Well, it's like, I mean, I try to reach my kids with a lot of analogies. You know, it's okay when you're learning a new video game. I mean, aside from trying to find all the cheat codes, you know, you'll do it. You know, it's the whole gamification theory. You know, you will try this for hours on end. Try it again and again. You'll fail. Do it again. Fail, do it again.
Over and
Fail,
over.
do it again. And it's like, why can't we let them do that? This is why, like, they just went crazy when I told them for this passion project thing. I had one student who was trying, he actually was trying to create a video game. And I said, it doesn't matter if you can't get it to work. If you have a plan for it and you show me your attempts and this is what didn't work and here's what I'm going to try next, I don't care if by the due date you have a finished video game. That's not the point. If this is what you're excited about, if this is what you want to do, try it. Show me your attempts, show me your process, reflect on that process. That was my element to the whole project, was the reflection piece. And they had a little trouble with that. But if you've reflected on it, if you show me what you've learned from your learning process, that is a success. It blew his mind. He did like he's like, no, I have to have a finished thing. And I'm like, no, you don't. It's okay. But that just blew his mind. Yeah.
It's something I'm super into and kind of consider an expert in gamification. So for my class that I teach, I don't have any points. And I encourage, because I want them to try something new and be willing to fail. And so like you said, my class is really about the reflection. The reflection is what I'm looking at. You know, to me, everything else we do is an experience that you're either successful at or you're not. And then, okay, so what do we learn about that, and how do you think you're going to apply that? So I love my co-author, Diane Harrington. We're writing a book right now of 50 things to teach math with Google Apps. And so we don't get much book writing done. She's teaching Math 10A and 10B, which is for liberal studies majors at the university. And so then we'll just start getting really nerdy writing lesson plans. And I'm like, did you think, she'll tell me what she's doing. I'm like, you can use Google Slides for that. So now what she's doing with her students is she gives them, they do 3 problems a week. So instead of like, here's all your homework problems that you just crank out a bunch of stuff that you're just doing, you pick 3. And they're not graded. She switches it to calling it conversations. So they put the math problem into a Google Slides presentation, and then they work it out and explain their thought process. And then she goes in and inserts comments, giving them feedback, prompting them with questions where the student replies back and makes corrections, where you're done when you understand it. You're not done when you have the right answer. So it's not about the answer. And you only have to do 3 problems. And so their grade is on having a conversation about math rather than getting a right answer. And so what she notices then is that students, they can choose any 3 problems. They'll choose the hard ones because now the process is about learning and her helping them to learn rather than just, if she was going to grade it, which ones you got the right answer, they would all do the easy ones, right? So I love that. That's some examples that we're putting in our book.
Yeah. I think the equivalent in my class is the discussion stuff, and it's a really hard habit to break at the beginning of the year. The students believe that discussion is, here's my point, and everybody has to listen to my point, and then the next person is going to say, that's a really good point, and then make their point. And so the idea of the conversation is really interesting to me. I have to break them of the habit of just making points they can be perceived as right.
Yeah.
Start a new habit with them of asking questions, of admitting when they don't understand something, of helping each other understand something, of even if it's just, you know, a vocabulary word or, you know, a point of clarification, but like admitting that they're confused, admitting that they need to talk something through before they'll understand it, that they need to, so and bringing those questions and not just the points that they want to make. Because again, they're risk averse. They want to be perceived as having got it all, having figured it all out. And yeah, so I do put a lot of time in the beginning of the year into that process of teaching them that the discussion is about conversation and learning through the conversation and not just contributing their ideas and reflecting on what that means to their learning.
That's one of the hardest things I've had with getting my students to do is learning how to ask questions. And that was in the reflection in the process journals and whatnot, getting them to ask questions because they either reiterate the questions that I've put to them or they, you know, or that their teachers put to them, or they're just reiterating, you know, it's what I call like when we do research projects and they often because I always work in tandem with the classroom teachers, but they often, you know, they're supposed to come up with their own guiding questions or their own essential questions or whatever, and they're all the same. Why is this the most important battle in the American, or the, you know, whatever? It's like, no, that's what I call dictionary research.
Right.
You know, it's something you can look up the answer to, and that is so what they're used to. You know, finding the answer. It's in their social studies textbook, and it's this. The question is the same darn thing that's in the subheading in their textbook, and then the answer is right there. No, that's not thinking. That's just regurgitating, and they have a really hard time doing more than that. You know, those more advanced skills, but it's really hard for them to learn how to ask questions.
My keynote is on exactly that topic. I'm so with you. I'll share my slides with you.
Yeah.
But circling that back is, you know, when we talk about when a parent's thinking this is appropriate, they're looking at can they look up the answer and get it? And so what if it's you know, my scenario is my kid's doing 0 + 1 when she knows how to multiply. But then the other side of that is what if we do want them to think and struggle through it, and it's a more complex question, which honestly, most parents weren't given complex questions or asked to come up with their own questions. Like that's a different paradigm from we're just teaching and like go on this journey with us together. And so how do we help parents to understand this new way? It's not just finding one answer, but real research.
And I can only imagine the conversation at home when my student says to the parent, "No, I'm supposed to be confused. Don't answer that for me. I'm supposed to be confused." I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a good point. That parents very often weren't taught in that paradigm, and they weren't taught that the question is just as important. And you know, and we're taught as teachers how to identify and create essential questions. And I don't know how often we actually teach that to the students.
I'm going to say I was not taught that.
Well, I mean, in the years that I've been teaching, that's been a real focus in our school for the last 8 years, 10 years. But you know, like
Cards versus math thing.
Yeah, like we expect kids to be able to come up with essential questions, and then we expect parents to accept that kids are asking questions. And I think that there needs, you know, if we could find a way for parents to understand that paradigm shift about asking questions, about being confused, about muddling through, about genuinely giving it your best before you finally say, you know what, I need to put it aside. And maybe that's the language. Instead of excusing, put it aside. Put it aside until you can have an actual conversation about it.
I
I don't
don't
know.
think we really have a culture that encourages critical thinking. And so if grown-ups can't do it, it makes it harder for kids to do it and see it and
This is
think
this is
that
what
it's
I'm
okay.
most excited for teaching in like it's 2016 is going to be a struggle to get parents to understand that we're looking at critical thinking and it's different, but that we're making that push. Like it makes me really happy, but it's
I
going to
think
be really hard. And so I do some really wacky grading things. Like I said, I got rid of points and I started doing things a long time ago when I'm realizing, if I give a kid an F and they do some work and they still have an F, that doesn't really motivate them to want to do some more work. So I, really trying to focus on learning. So at the beginning of the year, I'd have like a pile of students at the counselor's office trying to get out of my class. If you're going to do something different, you just have to invest in calling and talking to each stakeholder. And that's just kind of a lesson I learned a long time ago, is I can't send it in an email, I can't put it in a newsletter, I have to actually invest the time in talking to them. And I have great success. I'm going to call it almost 100% is when I actually talk to the parent, like, this is why I'm doing it. This is where we're trying to go. And they're like, oh, okay. And then, and they're some of my, turn out to be some of my biggest fans when at first, like, I'm going to get out of there. But the reason why is just because it was different and it wasn't something they were used to. But I struggle when I write lesson plans. I just agonize over everything that I'm doing. It's like what I didn't reach 100%, and I'm gonna try harder. And so sometimes my solution is wacky, and sometimes it works, and okay, sometimes I fail. But even when I fail and I have that conversation with the parent, like, this is what I was trying to do. Like, I noticed some of the kids, fill in the blank, and so this is what I thought might help. They can see kind of my thought process behind that. I very rarely to never have parents be like, you're a bad person and that was terrible for you to do that. But yeah, I have to be willing to call. So every time that I really am trying something new, I make an effort to sit down and start down the phone list. In fact, one year I literally drove to every parent's house because I was doing some different stuff and I went and met them face to face.
I do think that personal connection makes a difference. When you send home, that one teacher that I was talking about before sent home like a 3-page letter before school started. This is all the $150 worth of stuff you have to buy. And, when they're doing research, the note cards have to be the same color as the Post-its and the same color as the paper clips for this kind of note versus that kind of note, and like really crazy making stuff. And but I do think that personal connection makes a huge difference, and that keeping that conversation open with the parents and explaining, your thought process and where you're going, and also letting them know that you realize that you're not necessarily going to penalize their children for your own failures, so but not everybody is willing. We were talking about kids and parents being risk averse. A lot of teachers are risk averse as well, and sometimes, as we were talking about, for some very valid reasons, but sometimes it's habit too. So,
Alice, I have a question though. Would you, if you had 160 students, would you be calling and driving to everybody's home to talk to every parent?
That particular year where I drove to everyone's house, I had a half caseload. But yeah, on high school math, where I drove to their house, I had a half caseload. But that's still 75 students. And so that was just one particular year that I had an easy schedule. So I thought, since I do have only 3 classes, I'm gonna do this. But that didn't stop me, from the next year where I called all the parents, and so.
Because I don't know, by the time you finish calling them, it's like October.
I had some late nights, not gonna lie. But getting that parent buy-in and having them trust me, especially as a math teacher, I can't devalue that one. That was an incredibly valuable use of my time.
Yeah.
and I would bet dollars to donuts that after you called the first 5, the other 70 already knew that you were going to call because they'd already talked to the other ones.
I didn't experience that. It was a new conversation every time, but
In my district, they all call each other, and they all know which teacher. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. My district, they all talk to each other, and they make judgments, based on what other parents say.
of
I
course.
can't tell you how many people told me about this teacher, that teacher, whatever. Make sure your kid doesn't get that teacher. Well, not every kid responds to the same kind of teacher. What's good for your kid is not necessarily what's good for my kid. So,
My favorite teachers are always the ones that everyone else didn't like, because I do want to be challenged.
yeah, yeah.
So, ladies, this was a really great conversation, and I really am so glad that we made some time here to chat tonight. I know you guys I'm on the California West Coast, so it's not so late for me, but it's late for you. So thank you so much, and I'm going to stop the broadcast. Good night.